Sometimes the world judges us by what it sees on the surface, and forgets that power, dignity, and worth aren't defined by gender or appearance. But every now and then, someone steps forward who sees the truth that everyone else is too blind to recognize. This is the stunning story of a billionaire CEO who was humiliated and turned away from an exclusive restaurant simply for being a woman, and the humble single dad janitor who did something absolutely unthinkable when the entire establishment turned against her. A story of courage, betrayal, unexpected loyalty, and a connection powerful enough to change two broken lives forever. If you think you know how this ends, trust me, you don't. Before we begin, if you love stories about quiet heroism and standing up for what's right, then feel free to subscribe to our channel so you never miss the next journey of hope and justice. Thank you for being here with us. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The crystal chandeliers of Lucille Blue glittered like frozen stars above white tablecloths and gold-rimmed china. Soft piano music drifted through the dining room where Manhattan's elite gathered, their laughter polished and their conversations hushed with the kind of confidence that only wealth and influence could buy. This was the most exclusive restaurant in New York City, a place where reservations were made 6 months in advance, and where your last name mattered more than your bank account. Veronica Miles stood in the marble entryway, her Valentino suit tailored to perfection, her posture straight, despite the exhaustion pulling at her shoulders. She had flown in from London that morning after closing a deal that would reshape the tech industry, a deal worth $3.2 billion. Her company, Miles Global Innovations, had just become the third most valuable corporation in North America. She was 34 years old, self-made and untouchable, or so she thought. The maitre d', a rail-thin man named Gerard with silver hair slicked back like polished steel, looked up from his reservation book. His eyes swept over Veronica once, then twice, and his expression shifted from professional courtesy to something far colder. "May I help you?" he asked, his tone suggesting he already doubted it. Veronica smiled, the kind of smile that had closed boardroom deals and disarmed hostile investors. "Reservation for Miles, 8 o'clock. Gerard's finger traced down the page slowly, deliberately. "Miles," he repeated, as though the name tasted unpleasant. "I see it here. However, there seems to be a misunderstanding." Veronica's smile faltered. "Excuse me?" "This reservation," Gerard said, closing the book with a soft thud, "was made under the assumption that Mr. Miles would be dining with us this evening." The words landed like a slap. "I am Miles," Veronica said, her voice steady but quiet. "Veronica Miles, CEO of Miles Global Innovations. I made this reservation myself." Gerard's lips thinned into something resembling sympathy, but his eyes betrayed irritation. "Miss Miles, Lucille Blue maintains a certain standard. Our clientele expects a particular atmosphere. We require that unaccompanied female guests be seated in the lounge area, not the main dining room." Veronica blinked. For a moment, she was certain she had misheard. "I'm sorry, did you just say unaccompanied female guests?" "It's policy," Gerard replied smoothly. "We've found that single women dining alone can create an uncomfortable dynamic for our other patrons. I'm sure you understand." The room seemed to tilt. Veronica's pulse hammered in her ears. She had negotiated with senators, stared down venture capitalists, and rebuilt her company from near bankruptcy. But standing here in a $5,000 suit, she was being told she didn't belong because of her gender. "I've dined here before," Veronica said, her voice hardening. "I've brought clients here. I've spent tens of thousands of dollars at this establishment." "Always with a male companion," Gerard countered. "Tonight you are alone. I'm afraid the main dining room is not available." Behind Gerard, other staff members had paused, watching. A few diners near the entrance glanced over, curiosity flickering in their expressions. Veronica felt heat rising to her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from rage so fierce it threatened to choke her. "This is discrimination," she said quietly. Gerard shrugged, unmoved. "This is policy. If you'd like, I can seek you in the lounge. Otherwise, I'll have to ask you to leave." Veronica opened her mouth to argue, to demand to speak to the owner, to threaten legal action. But then she heard a voice from across the room, smooth and familiar and utterly devastating. "Gerard, is there a problem?" Her stomach dropped. Damon. Prescott emerged from the private dining area, his tailored Tom Ford suit fitting him like armor. He was handsome in the way that powerful men often were, sharp jaw, confident stride, eyes that assessed and calculated with ruthless precision. He had been her business partner for 5 years. 3 months ago, he had also been her fiancé. "Mr. Prescott," Gerard said, relief flooding his tone. "I was just explaining to Miss Miles that the main dining room requires accompanied guests." Damon's gaze settled on Veronica, and something cold flickered behind his polished smile. "Veronica," he said softly, "I didn't realize you'd be here tonight." "You knew," Veronica said, her voice low and tight. "You made this reservation under my name. You told them to expect a Mr. Miles." Damon tilted his head, feigning confusion. "I'm sure that's a misunderstanding." But Veronica saw it, the faint curl of satisfaction at the corner of his mouth. This wasn't an accident. This was calculated. 3 months ago, she had discovered Damon had been quietly siphoning company funds into offshore accounts, preparing to stage a hostile takeover of her own company. When she confronted him, he'd smiled that same smile and told her no one would believe her. After all, he was the Harvard-educated heir to the Prescott fortune. She was the scholarship student who'd clawed her way up from nothing. She had broken off the engagement immediately and spent the last 3 months gathering evidence, building her case, preparing to expose him. But Damon had struck first. Tonight wasn't about a reservation. It was about humiliation. It was about reminding her that no matter how much money she made, no matter how powerful she became, the world would always see her as less. "Veronica," Damon said, his voice dripping with false concern, "you look exhausted. Perhaps dining alone isn't the best idea. Why don't you go home and rest?" The condescension in his tone made her hands curl into fists. Gerard cleared his throat. "Miss Miles, I really must insist that you either move to the lounge or vacate the premises." Veronica looked around. Every eye in the entryway was on her now. Whispers rippled through the nearby tables. She could feel the weight of their judgment, their assumptions, their certainty that she didn't belong. She had never felt smaller in her life. And then a voice, quiet but firm, cut through the silence. "Excuse me." Everyone turned. A man stood near. The coat check, holding a mop in one hand and a bucket in the other. He wore faded gray coveralls with a name patch stitched above the pocket. Warren. His hair was dark and slightly too long, his hands calloused, his boots scuffed. He looked completely out of place among the marble and gold and wealth, but his eyes, deep brown and unwavering, were fixed on Gerard with an intensity that made the maitre d' stiffen. "Yes?" Gerard said, his tone sharp with irritation. "What is it?" Warren set down his bucket and took a single step forward. "I've been cleaning this restaurant for 3 years," he said calmly. "And in that time, I've watched you see plenty of women alone. So either your policy is new, or it's selective." Gerard's face flushed. "This is none of your concern." "It is when it's happening in front of me," Warren replied. His voice didn't rise, but it carried weight. "And it's especially my concern when it's wrong." Veronica stared at him, stunned. She didn't know this man, had never seen him before in her life. But here he was, a janitor in coveralls, standing up for her when no one else would. Damon let out a short, derisive laugh. "And who exactly are you?" Warren met his gaze without flinching. Someone who knows the difference between class and cruelty. The words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. For the first time that evening, Veronica felt something other than humiliation. She felt seen. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The silence in Lucille Blue's entryway stretched impossibly long. Gerard's face had gone from flush to pale, his hands gripping the reservation book like it might shield him from the quiet accusation hanging in the air. Damon Prescott looked at Warren the way someone might look at an insect that had wandered onto an expensive rug, with disdain and a flicker of genuine confusion. But Veronica couldn't stop staring at the janitor, who had just done what no one else in this glittering room had dared to do. He had told the truth. Warren didn't move. He stood with his shoulders square, his expression calm but resolute, as though he'd made a decision he had no intention of reversing. There was something about him that reminded Veronica of old photographs she'd seen of steelworkers and dockyard laborers, men whose strength wasn't loud or showy, but deeply rooted, unshakable. "Sir," Gerard stammered, trying to reclaim control. "I appreciate your concern, but this is a matter of restaurant policy, and it does not require input from the maintenance staff." "Policy," Warren repeated, his tone flat. "Is that what we're calling it?" Damon stepped forward, his smile sharp and patronizing. "Look, I'm sure you mean well, but you're out of your depth here. This is a private matter between Miss Miles and the restaurant. Why don't you go back to whatever it is you were doing?" Warren's gaze didn't waver. "I was doing my job. Same as everyone else here. Difference is, my job doesn't involve humiliating people." A gasp rippled through the nearby tables. Veronica felt her breath catch. No one spoke to men like Damon Prescott this way, especially not someone in coveralls holding a mop. And yet, Warren's words landed with the kind of quiet authority that couldn't be dismissed. Damon's jaw tightened. "You have no idea who you're talking to." "I know exactly who I'm talking to," Warren replied. "Someone who thinks power means you can treat people however you want." Veronica's chest tightened. She had spent the last 3 months fighting Damon in boardrooms and legal offices, drowning in depositions and counter-motions. But this stranger, this janitor, had just said in 10 seconds what she'd been screaming into the void for months. Before Damon could respond, a small voice called out from the hallway behind Warren. "Daddy?" A little girl appeared, no older than 8, with dark curls pulled into 2 lopsided ponytails, and a backpack covered in butterfly stickers. She wore a yellow raincoat even though it hadn't rained all day, and her sneakers lit up with. Every step, she looked up at Warren with wide, worried eyes. "Daddy, why is everyone staring?" Warren's expression softened immediately. He knelt down, setting a hand gently on her shoulder. "It's okay, sweetheart. Just a misunderstanding." The little girl looked past him, her gaze landing on Veronica. For a moment, she just stared, taking in the tailored suit, the polished heels. The exhaustion Veronica couldn't quite hide. Then the girl walked forward, slipping past Gerard's half-hearted attempt to stop her, and stood directly in front of Veronica. "Are you sad?" The girl asked simply. Veronica blinked, caught completely off guard. She had been asked 1,000 questions in her life. Aggressive questions, probing questions, questions designed to trap or diminish her, but no one had asked her that. Not like this. Not with such unfiltered sincerity. "I'm fine," Veronica managed. Though her voice wavered, the girl tilted her head, unconvinced. "Daddy says people who say they're fine are usually the saddest." Veronica let out a breath that was half laugh, half something dangerously close to a sob. "Your daddy sounds very wise." The girl nodded solemnly. He says the best people are the ones who help when no one's looking." She glanced back at Warren, then at Veronica again. "You look like a queen." "Why are they being mean to you?" Veronica's throat tightened. She couldn't speak. Couldn't form words around the lump rising. In her chest, Warren approached slowly, gently guiding his daughter back. "Hadley, we talked about giving people space, remember?" Hadley nodded but didn't take her eyes off Veronica. "But she needs help, Daddy." "I know," Warren said quietly. He looked up at Veronica, and for the first time, she saw something in his expression that wasn't just defiance or conviction. It was empathy. Real, unguarded empathy. Gerard had recovered enough to clear his throat loudly. "Mr. Ellison, if you continue to disrupt the dining experience, I will have no choice but to terminate your employment." Warren straightened but didn't step back. "That's your choice to make." "Daddy," Hadley whispered, tugging on his sleeve. "Are you gonna lose your job?" "Maybe," Warren said honestly. "But some things are more important than a job." Veronica felt something crack open inside her. She had spent years surrounded by people who measured every word, every gesture, every decision against profit margins and public perception. But this man, this stranger, was willing to risk his livelihood for a principle. For her, Warren, she sighed, her voice barely above a whisper. He met her gaze. "You don't have to do this." "I know," he replied. "But I'm going to anyway." Damon let out an exasperated sigh. "This is absurd." "Gerard, call security. Have this man and his daughter removed." Hadley's eyes went wide with alarm. Warren placed a reassuring hand on her back, but Veronica saw the flicker of worry cross his face. He was risking everything, his job, his dignity, maybe even his ability, to provide for his daughter, and for what? For a woman he didn't even know. Veronica's hands were shaking, but not from fear anymore. From something else. Something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Resolved, she stepped forward, placing herself between Warren and Gerard. "If you call security," she said, her voice cold and clear, "I will make sure every major news outlet in this city knows that Le Ciel Bleu practices gender-based discrimination. I will also make sure they know you threatened to remove a man and his young daughter for pointing it out." Gerard paled. Damon laughed, but it was forced. "Veronica, you're being dramatic." "No," she said, turning to face him fully. "I'm being clear. You orchestrated this to humiliate me. You thought you could remind me of my place, make me feel small, make me doubt myself. But you forgot something, Damon." "And what's that?" he asked, his smile tight. "I don't stay down." 4. The first time, Damon's expression faltered. Veronica turned back to Warren and Hadley. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Both of you." Warren nodded once. "You don't owe us thanks." "Yes," Veronica said. "I do." Hadley beamed up at her. "You're really brave." Veronica crouched down, her eyes level with the little girl's. "So are you." Gerard, sensing the situation spiraling out of his control, took a step back. "Miss Miles, if you would prefer, I can arrange a table in the main dining room after all." Veronica straightened, her gaze icy. "I wouldn't eat here if you paid me." She turned toward the door, her heels clicking sharply against the marble. But before she reached the exit, she paused and looked back at Warren. "Can I buy you and your daughter dinner?" she asked. "Somewhere better than this." Warren glanced down at Hadley, who was already nodding enthusiastically. He smiled, just a little. "That sounds good." And for the first time that evening, Veronica felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hoped that the diner 3 blocks away from Le Ciel Bleu was everything the upscale restaurant was not. Vinyl booths patched with duct tape, fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly, laminated menus sticky with syrup, and a waitress named Joanne who called everyone hun and didn't care if you were a billionaire or a janitor. Veronica had walked past this place 100 times without ever noticing it. Now sitting across from Warren and Hadley in a corner booth, she realized she had been missing something essential. Authenticity. Hadley was halfway through a stack of pancakes that towered over her plate, syrup dripping down her chin as she talked animatedly about a school project involving butterflies. Warren listened with the kind of focus Veronica rarely saw, nodding at the right moments, asking questions that made Hadley's eyes light up even brighter. He had rolled up the sleeves of his coveralls, and Veronica noticed the faint scars on his forearms, the kind that came from years of hard work. "So then Mrs. Pemberton said my butterfly was the most colorful in the whole class," Hadley finished proudly. "Even though I accidentally used purple instead of blue." "Purple butterflies are the best kind," Veronica said, surprising herself with how easily the words came. Hadley grinned. "That's what Daddy said." Warren caught Veronica's eye and offered a small, tired smile. "She doesn't need much encouragement when it comes to art." "Creativity should always be encouraged," Veronica replied. She realized she hadn't touched her coffee. Her hands were still trembling slightly, the adrenaline from the confrontation refusing to fade. Hadley tilted her head, studying Veronica with the unnerving perceptiveness that some young ones possessed. "Are you still sad?" Veronica hesitated. She could lie. She was good at lying, at smoothing over emotions, at presenting the version of herself that the world expected. But something about Hadley's open, honest gaze made her want to tell the truth. "A little," Veronica admitted. "But less than I was an hour ago," Hadley nodded sagely. "Daddy says sometimes sad takes a while to go away, like when Mommy left." The words hung in the air, quiet but heavy. Warren's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He set down his fork and looked at Hadley gently. "Sweetheart, maybe we don't need to talk about that right now, but it's true," Hadley said simply. "And you said we should always tell the truth, even when it's hard." Warren exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. "You're right, I did say that." Veronica felt her chest tighten. She recognized that tone, the weariness of someone who had carried a wound for so long it had become part of them. "You don't have to explain," she said quietly. Warren shook his head. "It's all right." He glanced at Hadley, who had returned her attention to her pancakes, then looked back at Veronica. "My wife left 2 years ago. She said she didn't sign up for the life we had." The long hours, the financial stress, raising Hadley in a one-bedroom apartment in Queens. His voice was steady, but Veronica could hear the fracture beneath it. She wanted more. "I couldn't give it to her, so she left." Veronica felt a sharp pang of recognition. Different circumstances, same core wound. Abandonment, betrayal, the realization that someone you loved valued something else more than they valued you. "I'm sorry," she said, and she meant it. Warren shrugged, though the gesture looked heavier than it should. It hurt. Still does sometimes, but Hadley and we manage. He looked at his daughter, and his expression softened in a way that made Veronica's heart ache. "She's the best thing I ever did." Hadley looked up, syrup still on her chin. "Daddy says I'm his favorite person in the whole world." "That's because you are," Warren said simply. Veronica felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them back quickly, but not quickly enough. Warren noticed. "What about you?" he asked gently. "That man at the restaurant. The one who set you up." Veronica's hands tightened around her coffee cup. "Damon Prescott. He was my business partner. My fiancé until 3 months ago." Warren waited, not pushing, just present. "I built my company from nothing," Veronica continued, her voice quiet. "Worked 80-hour weeks, mortgaged everything I had, took risks no one thought would pay off. And they did. Miles Global Innovations became one of the most successful tech companies in the country. Damon joined 5 years ago as my CFO. He was brilliant, charming, everything I thought I wanted in a partner." She paused, the bitterness rising in her throat. "Turns out he was also embezzling, planning to push me out of my own company. When I confronted him, he said no one would believe me, that I was too emotional, too unstable to run a company, that I should step aside gracefully before I embarrassed myself." Warren's expression darkened. "But you didn't step aside." "No," Veronica said. I hired the best lawyers I could find. Started building a case. But Damon has connections, old money, Ivy League networks, friends in every corner of the industry. He's been systematically destroying my reputation for months. Tonight was just another move. Public humiliation at a place where everyone who matters would hear about it by morning. Hadley had stopped eating, her eyes wide. That's really mean. Yes, Veronica said, it is. Why didn't anyone else help you? Hadley asked. At the fancy restaurant. The question was so simple, so direct, and yet it cut straight to the truth Veronica had been avoiding. Because they were afraid, she said quietly. Or they didn't care. Or they agreed with him. We cared, Hadley said firmly. Right, Daddy? Right, Warren agreed. He leaned forward slightly, his voice low and sincere. What happened tonight was wrong. You didn't deserve that. Veronica felt the tears threaten. Again. You could have lost your job. Jobs come and go, Warren said. But there are some things you don't compromise on. Dignity is one of them, yours and mine. The words settled over Veronica like a balm. She had spent months surrounded by lawyers and advisors who spoke in legal strategies and calculated risks. But Warren spoke in principles, in simple, unshakable truths. Why did you stand up for me? She asked. You didn't know me. You had everything to lose. Warren was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. Because 2 years ago, when my wife left, I was standing in our apartment holding a box of her things. I didn't know how I was going to pay rent. Didn't know how I was going to explain to Hadley why Mommy wasn't coming home. I felt like the world had decided I wasn't enough. He looked at Veronica, his eyes steady. I know what it feels like to be dismissed, to be told you don't matter. I wasn't going to stand by and watch someone do that to another person, not if I could help it. Veronica's breath caught. You're a good man, Warren Ellison, he smiled faintly. I'm just a man who's trying to teach his daughter that doing the right thing matters more than doing the easy thing. Hadley reached across the table and took Veronica's hand. Her fingers were small and sticky with syrup, but her grip was firm. You're not alone, she said seriously. You have us now. Veronica looked down at the little girl's hand in hers, then up at Warren, who nodded once. A silent agreement. A promise. And for the first time in 3 months, Veronica felt something shift inside her. The isolation that had wrapped around her like chains began to loosen. She wasn't just fighting anymore. She had allies. She had people who saw her, really saw her. Not as a CEO or a failed fiancé or a woman who didn't belong. Just as a person worth standing beside. Thank you, Veronica whispered, her voice breaking slightly. Both of you. Warren smiled, and it was warm and real. You're welcome. Joanne came by with the check, and Veronica paid without hesitation. As they stood to leave, Hadley tugged on Veronica's sleeve. Can we see you again? She asked hopefully. Veronica looked at Warren, who didn't object. I'd like that, she said. Hadley beamed. Good, because Daddy needs more friends. Warren chuckled, embarrassed. Hadley. But Veronica laughed, a real laugh, the kind she hadn't managed in months. So do I, sweetheart. So do I. As they stepped out into the cool night air, Veronica felt something she hadn't felt since the day she discovered Damon's betrayal. She felt like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't broken after all. 3 days after the incident at Lucille Blue, Veronica stood in the lobby of Miles Global Innovations headquarters, watching her employees hurry past with their heads down and their voices hushed. The building rose 47 stories above Midtown Manhattan, all glass and steel and ambition made tangible. She had designed every floor, chosen every detail, poured her entire soul into making this place a reflection of what she believed a company could be. Innovative, ethical, forward-thinking. Now it felt like enemy territory. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock. Veronica had spent the previous 72 hours preparing, gathering documentation, rehearsing her defense against the allegations. Damon had been quietly spreading through every channel he controlled: mismanagement, emotional instability, poor judgment. The words had taken root like poison, whispered in conference rooms and investor calls, repeated until they started to sound like truth. Her lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Phoebe Stanton, met her at the elevator. "The board is already seated," Phoebe said quietly. Damon arrived early. "He's been talking to them for 20 minutes. Veronica's jaw tightened. "Of course he has." "Veronica," Phoebe's tone softened. "You need to stay calm in there. Don't let him provoke you. If you lose your composure, it plays directly into his narrative." "I know," Veronica replied, though her hands were already trembling. The elevator doors opened on the 45th floor. The executive boardroom stretched before them, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A long mahogany table surrounded by 12 chairs. 11 were occupied. Damon sat at the far end, perfectly composed in his navy suit, his expression a careful blend of concern and authority. He looked like a man reluctantly doing his duty. The board members turned as Veronica entered. Some offered polite nods. Others avoided her eyes entirely. "Veronica," said Roland Matthews, the board chairman and one of the company's earliest investors. "Thank you for joining us. Please have a seat." Veronica took her place at the head of the table, directly across from Damon. He met her gaze and smiled, thin and cold. Roland cleared his throat. "We've called this meeting to address some serious concerns regarding the management and direction of Miles Global. Damon has brought several issues to our attention that require immediate discussion." "Issues," Veronica repeated carefully. Damon leaned forward, folding his hands on the table. "Veronica, no one here doubts your contributions to this company. You built something extraordinary. But over the past 6 months, your decision-making has become increasingly erratic. Missed meetings, impulsive investments, emotional outbursts with senior staff." "That's not true," Veronica said, keeping her voice level. "Isn't it?" Damon pulled out a folder, sliding it across the table. "These are documented complaints from 3 department heads. Reports of volatile behavior, unreasonable demands, decisions made without proper consultation." Veronica opened the folder. The complaints were real, signed and dated. But the context had been stripped away, twisted until her passion looked like instability, her high standards looked like cruelty. "This is manipulated," she said quietly. "That's a serious accusation," Roland said, frowning. Damon's expression remained sympathetic. "Veronica, I understand you've been under tremendous stress. The pressure of running a company this size takes a toll. There's no shame in admitting you need help." The condescension in his voice made her hands curl into fists beneath the table. Before she could respond, the boardroom door opened. Everyone turned. Warren Ellison stood in the doorway, wearing the same coveralls from 3 nights ago, work boots still scuffed, a maintenance badge clipped to his chest. Hadley stood beside him, holding his hand, her backpack covered in butterfly stickers. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Warren said calmly, "but I was told this was a public company matter. I believe employees have the right to observe board meetings." Roland blinked. "I'm sorry, who are you?" "Warren Ellison. I work janitorial services on floors 12 through 20. This is my daughter Hadley." Damon let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "This is absurd. Security, please escort these people out." But Warren didn't move. "Before you do that, I think the board should know that 3 nights ago, I watched Mr. Prescott orchestrate a public humiliation of your CEO. He arranged for her to be denied service at a restaurant based on her gender, then showed up personally to witness it." The room went completely still. "That's a lie," Damon said sharply. "Is it?" Warren pulled out his phone. "Because I recorded the whole thing. Would you like me to play it for the board?" Damon's face drained of color. Roland leaned forward. "Mr. Ellison, that's a serious claim." It's a serious situation, Warren replied. He tapped his phone, and Damon's voice filled the room, smooth and cruel. Veronica, you look exhausted. Perhaps dining alone isn't the best idea. Why don't you go home and rest? Then Gerard's voice. Miss Miles, I really must insist that you either move to the lounge or vacate the premises. The recording continued, capturing the entire confrontation, including Damon's dismissive laughter and his attempt to have Warren removed. When it ended, the silence was deafening. Hadley looked up at the board members with wide, serious eyes. That was really mean, she said. My teacher says bullies pick on people because they're scared. One of the board members, a woman named Laurel Hastings, cleared her throat. Mr. Prescott, would you care to explain this? Damon's jaw worked. This is taken out of context. I had nothing to do with the restaurant's policies. You knew exactly what would happen, Veronica said, her voice steady now. You made that reservation under my name. You told Gerard to expect a male guest. He showed up to watch. That's speculation, Damon snapped. Warren stepped forward. I also have the contact information for Gerard and 3 other staff members who heard Mr. Prescott give explicit instructions about how Miss Miles should be treated. I spoke to them yesterday. They're willing to testify if needed. Damon shot to his feet. This is outrageous. You're going to take the word of a janitor over mine? Why not? Hadley asked innocently. Daddy doesn't lie. Several board members exchanged glances. Roland's expression had shifted from polite concern to something much harder. Mr. Prescott, Roland said slowly. This recording raises serious questions about your conduct and your motivations regarding Miss Miles. I've dedicated 5 years to this company, Damon said, his voice rising. I've brought in investors, secured deals, increased our valuation by 40%. And you're going to believe some nobody with a camera phone. That nobody, Veronica said quietly, has more integrity than you've ever had. Damon's eyes flashed. You're going to regret this, Veronica, all of this. When the truth comes out about your financial mismanagement, about the risks you've taken with investor capital, you'll be finished. What financial mismanagement? Phoebe asked sharply. Damon smiled coldly. The offshore accounts, the unauthorized transfers, the shell companies Miss Miles has been using to hide assets. Veronica felt ice slide down her spine. What are you talking about? Don't play innocent, Damon said. I have documentation. Transactions. You authorized. Accounts opened in your name. The SEC is already investigating. The room erupted in murmurs. Roland raised a hand for silence. Mr. Prescott, do you have evidence of these claims? I submitted everything to the board's legal team this morning, Damon replied smoothly. Check your emails. Veronica's hands shook. He had done it. He had framed her using the same accounts he'd created for his own embezzlement. And now, with the board already doubting her, with her reputation already damaged, the accusation would stick. Warren's voice cut through the chaos. If I may, Roland looked at him. Yes, Mr. Ellison? I'm not a financial expert, Warren said. But I know when someone's lying. And I know that if Miss Miles had actually done something wrong, Mr. Prescott wouldn't need to work this hard to destroy her reputation first. Damon's expression twisted with rage. You have no idea what you're talking about. Maybe not, Warren agreed. But I know someone who does. A forensic accountant named Keith Winslow. Used to work for the FBI. He owes me a favor. I called him yesterday and asked him to take a look at Miles Global's financial records. Public filings only, nothing illegal. He found something interesting. Damon went very still. He found that every suspicious transaction Miss Miles supposedly authorized was processed during times when her digital credentials were accessed from Mr. Prescott's office. Warren continued. Different IP address. Different login patterns. Someone using her passwords. The room exploded. Veronica stared at Warren, her heart pounding. He had done this. In 3 days, he had found evidence she'd been trying to uncover for 3 months. Damon's face was white. That's circumstantial, maybe, Warren said. But it's enough for the sect to take a closer look. And I'm guessing when they do, they'll find a lot more. Roland stood slowly. This meeting is adjourned. Mr. Prescott, you're suspended pending a full investigation. Security will escort you from the building. You can't do this, Damon said, his voice strangled. I just did, Roland replied. As security approached, Damon turned to Veronica, his eyes blazing with fury and something close to fear. This isn't over. But Veronica felt something shift inside her. For the first time in months, she wasn't afraid of him. Yes, she said quietly, it is. As Damon was led from the room, Hadley tugged on Warren's hand. Daddy, did we help? Warren knelt down, brushing a curl from her face. Yeah, sweetheart. We helped. Veronica stood, her legs unsteady, and walked over to them. How did you find all that? Warren shrugged. I told you. I know someone. And I know how to ask questions. You saved me, Veronica whispered. No, Warren said gently. You saved yourself. I just gave you the tools. And for the first time since, the nightmare began. Veronica felt like maybe she could win this fight after all. The city lights blurred through the rain-streaked windows of Veronica's office as she sat alone, staring at the financial documents spread across her desk. It was nearly midnight, and the building had emptied hours ago. The board had suspended Damon, but the investigation was just beginning. The accusations he'd leveled against her, the falsified records, the poisoned relationships with investors. All of it still hung over her like a sword waiting to fall. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, expecting another message from Phoebe or one of the lawyers. Instead, it was Warren. Hadley's in the hospital, St. Vincent's. Can you come? Veronica was out of her chair before she'd fully processed the words. 20 minutes later, she pushed through the emergency room doors, her hair damp from the rain, her heels clicking against the linoleum. She found Warren in the waiting area, his coverall streaked with something dark, his face pale and drawn. He looked up when she approached, and the relief in his eyes was so raw it made her chest ache. What happened? Veronica asked, sitting beside him. Warren ran a hand through his hair, his voice unsteady. We were walking home from the community center. Hadley takes art classes there on Tuesday nights. A car ran a red light, came out of nowhere. I pulled her back, but she hit the pavement hard. She's been unconscious for an hour. Veronica's heart clenched. Did they say anything? Possible concussion. They're running tests. Warren's hands were shaking. I can't lose her, Veronica. She's all I have. Veronica took his hand without thinking, gripping it tightly. You won't. Hadley's strong. She's 8 years old, Warren said, his voice breaking. She shouldn't have to be strong. A doctor emerged from the double doors, his expression neutral but not unkind. Mr. Ellison? Warren shot to his feet. How is she? She's stable. The CT scan shows a mild concussion, but no bleeding. However, there's something else. The doctor hesitated. Does Hadley have a history of seizures? Warren's face went white. No, never. She had a brief seizure while we were running the scan. We've stabilized her, but I'd like to keep her overnight for observation. I'm also recommending a full neurological workup. Seizures in someone her age, especially after head trauma, can indicate underlying conditions that need to be addressed. Warren sank back into his chair, his head in his hands. The doctor continued, the tests will be expensive. I'm not sure what your insurance situation is, but I wanted to be upfront about the costs. I'll cover it, Veronica said immediately. Both Warren and the doctor turned to her. I'm sorry, who are you? The doctor asked. A friend, Veronica replied. Whatever tests Hadley needs, whatever treatment, I'll pay for all of it. Warren shook. His head, Veronica, you can't do that. Yes, I can, she said firmly. And I will. The doctor nodded slowly. All right. I'll have the administrative staff update the billing information. You can see her now if you'd like. She's awake. Warren stood, and Veronica followed him through the doors into the pediatric ward. Hadley lay in a small bed, surrounded by monitors, her face pale against the white pillows. A bandage covered her forehead, and a 4-line ran into her arm. But her eyes were open, and when she saw Warren, she smiled weakly. Hi, Daddy. Warren crossed the room in 2 strides, kneeling beside the bed and taking her hand. Hi, sweetheart. How are you feeling? Dizzy, Hadley admitted, and my head hurts. No. The doctors are going to help you feel better. Hadley's gaze drifted to Veronica. You came. Of course I came, Veronica said, her voice thick. Daddy said you're really busy. That you have a whole company to run. Veronica sat on the edge of the bed. Nothing is more important than being here. Hadley smiled, then winced. The car was really loud. I was scared. You were so brave, Warren said, brushing her hair back gently. But Hadley's eyes filled with tears. I don't feel brave. I feel scared all the time now. Warren's jaw tightened, and Veronica saw the pain flash across his face. He opened his mouth to respond, but Hadley continued. What if the seizure comes back? What if something's really wrong with me? What if I'm broken? I'm broken. Veronica felt something crack inside her chest. She leaned forward, looking Hadley in the eyes. Listen to me, sweetheart. You are not broken. Do you hear me? Being scared doesn't make you weak. Being hurt doesn't make you less. You are still the same brilliant, brave, wonderful girl you were before tonight. But what if I can't do art anymore? Hadley whispered. What if my hands shake too much? What if I can't remember things? Veronica took a shaky breath. Then we'll figure it out together. And no matter what happens, you will still be you. The most important parts of you aren't in your hands or your memory. They're in your heart. Hadley looked at her father. Is that true, Daddy? Warren's voice was hoarse. Yes, it's true. A nurse entered to check Hadley's vitals, and Warren stepped back, pulling Veronica with him. Thank you, he said quietly. For what you said to her, for being here. I meant every word, Veronica replied. She hesitated, then continued. Warren, I need to tell you something. He looked at her. When I was 12, I was in a car accident. My parents died. I was in the hospital for weeks with a spinal injury. The doctor said I might never walk normally again. She swallowed hard. I was terrified. I thought my life was over. But a physical therapist told me something I've never forgotten. She said, you're not broken. You're just becoming something different. And different can still be extraordinary. Warren's eyes softened. You walked again. Eventually. But the point is, I know what it's like to feel like your body betrayed you. To be afraid of what comes next. And I know that having people who believe in you makes all the difference. Warren reached out and took her hand. You didn't have to. Come tonight. Yes, Veronica said. I did. You stood up for me when no one else would. You saved my career, maybe my life. The least I can do is be here when you need me. This is more than returning a favor, Warren said quietly. Veronica met his gaze. And something unspoken passed between them, something deeper than gratitude or friendship. I know, she whispered. The nurse finished her checks and left. Hadley had fallen asleep, her breathing steady and calm. Warren sat beside the bed, and Veronica sat beside him. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Hours passed. The rain continued outside, and Veronica realized something profound had shifted. For years she had defined herself by what she could control, by the empire she'd built, by her ability to outthink and outwork everyone around her. But tonight, sitting in a hospital room with a man and his daughter who had become impossibly important to her. She understood something new. Strength wasn't just about standing alone. It was about knowing when to stand with others. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid to let someone in. The neurological tests came back 3 days later. Hadley's seizure had been an isolated incident triggered by the head trauma, but the doctors recommended monitoring and follow-up appointments. Warren had taken the week off work, staying by his daughter's side, and Veronica had quietly ensured that his paycheck continued without interruption. She'd also arranged for the best pediatric neurologist in the city to oversee Hadley's care, but while Hadley recovered, another storm was brewing. Veronica sat in her office, staring at an email that had arrived at 6:47 that morning. The subject line read, "You need to see this." The sender was Keith Winslow, the forensic accountant Warren had connected her with. Veronica opened the attachment, and her blood ran cold. The document was a complete financial audit of Miles Global's accounts, going back 6 years. Keith had found what Veronica's own team had missed. Damon hadn't just been embezzling. He'd been systematically siphoning funds through a network of shell companies, then using those same companies to make it look like Veronica had authorized the transactions. But the real revelation was buried in the metadata. Every fraudulent transfer had been processed during board meetings, investor calls, or company events, times when Veronica was publicly occupied and couldn't have been at her computer. Damon had used her digital credentials, but he'd been sloppy. The IP addresses, the login times, the keystroke patterns, all of it pointed back to him. But there was more. Keith had found emails, archived messages Damon thought he'd deleted, showing that he'd been planning this for over 2 years. Long before Veronica had discovered the embezzlement. Long before their engagement ended. He had always intended to take her company, and the final email, sent just 3 weeks ago, was addressed to Roland Matthews and 2 other board members. "Veronica is becoming unstable. I'm concerned about her ability to lead. We need to discuss succession planning." Veronica's hands shook as she read. Damon hadn't just stolen from her. He'd been actively poisoning the board against her for months, laying the groundwork to push her out. A knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. Warren entered, looking tired but steady. Hadley was with him, a colorful bandage still on her forehead, but her eyes bright. "We brought lunch," Hadley announced, holding up a paper bag. "Daddy said you forget to eat when you're working." Veronica smiled despite the weight pressing on her chest. "Your daddy is very observant." Warren set the bag on her desk, then noticed her expression. "What's wrong?" Veronica turned her laptop toward him. Keith said his full report. Warren read. In silence, his jaw tightening with each line. When he finished, he looked up, eyes blazing. "He planned this from the beginning." "Yes," Veronica said quietly. Hadley climbed into the chair beside Warren, sensing the tension. "Is the mean man trying to hurt you again?" Veronica hesitated, then nodded. "He's trying. But you have proof now," Warren said. "This is everything you need to clear your name and put him away." "It's evidence," Veronica agreed. "But Damon has resources. Lawyers, connections, influence. Even with this, he could drag the case out for years. Destroy my reputation in the process." Warren leaned forward. "So what do we do?" Veronica looked at him, then at Hadley. These 2 people had given her something she hadn't felt in years, hope. But now she was pulling them into a battle that could cost them everything. "I can't ask you to keep fighting this with me," she said quietly. "You've already done so much. You could get hurt. Both of you." Hadley frowned. "But we're your friends." "I know, sweetheart. But friends don't let friends walk into danger." Warren stood, crossing to the window. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he turned back to her. 2 years ago, when my wife left, I felt like I'd failed. Failed as a husband, as a provider, as a man. I was cleaning floors at night and barely making rent. I felt invisible. He paused, but then I realized something. Just because I was struggling didn't mean I was worthless. And just because the world didn't see me didn't mean I couldn't make a difference. Veronica felt her throat tighten. You didn't just stand up for yourself at that restaurant, Warren continued. You stood up for every person who's ever been told they don't belong. And yeah, this fight is going to be hard. Damon's going to come at you with everything he has. But you're not alone anymore. Hadley nodded emphatically. We're a team. Veronica felt tears sting her eyes. I don't deserve you. Yes, Warren said simply, you do. Before Veronica could respond, her office door burst open. Phoebe rushed in, her face flushed. Turn on the news, now. Veronica grabbed the remote and switched on the television mounted on the wall. A breaking news banner scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Miles Global's CFO arrested for fraud and embezzlement. The anchor's voice filled the room. Damon Prescott, Chief Financial Officer of Miles Global Innovations, was taken into custody this morning following an investigation by the Securities and Exchange Commission. Prescott is accused of embezzling over $40 million through fraudulent transactions and attempting to frame CEO Veronica Miles for the crimes. Veronica's hand flew to her mouth. The footage cut to Damon being let out of his apartment building in handcuffs, his face pale and drawn. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. The SEC received an anonymous tip 3 days ago, the anchor continued, including detailed financial records and communications, showing a pattern of fraud dating back several years. Prescott is expected to face multiple federal charges. Veronica turned to Warren, her eyes wide. Did you do this? Warren shook his head. Not me, Keith. But you gave him the information. I gave him what he needed to find the truth, Warren said. What he did with it was his choice. Phoebe laughed, a sound of pure relief. This is it, Veronica. This clears you completely. But Veronica couldn't speak. She could only stare at the screen as the man who had tried to destroy her was led away. In handcuffs, the vindication should have felt triumphant. Instead, it felt like exhaling after holding her breath for months. Hadley tugged on her sleeve. Does this mean the mean man can't hurt you anymore? Veronica knelt down, pulling the little girl into a hug. Yes, sweetheart. It means I'm safe now. Good, Hadley said firmly. Because we need you. Warren met Veronica's eyes over Hadley's head. The unspoken understanding between them had deepened into something neither could deny anymore. And Veronica realized that somewhere in the chaos of the past week, she'd stopped fighting just to survive. She'd started fighting to build something new. The federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan stood like a monument to justice, its granite columns rising 6 stories high, carved with words that promised equality under law. Veronica had walked past this building 100 times without giving it much thought. Now standing at the base of the stone steps, she felt the weight of those words pressing down on her shoulders. Today was Damon's preliminary hearing. The charges were extensive: wire fraud, embezzlement, identity theft, and conspiracy. The SEC had built an airtight case using Keith's forensic audit, combined with testimony from Gerard and several LaCille Blue staff members who confirmed Damon's instructions to humiliate Veronica. But Damon's legal team was legendary, composed of attorneys who had gotten billionaires acquitted of far worse crimes. Phoebe stood beside Veronica, briefcase in hand, her expression focused. Remember, you're not on trial here. You're a witness. Just tell the truth. Warren approached from the parking area, Hadley's hand tucked safely in his. He'd taken another day off work to be here, despite Veronica's protests that he didn't need to come, but he'd simply said, "You were there when Hadley needed you. I'm here now." Hadley wore a dress covered in sunflowers, and she'd insisted on bringing a drawing she'd made the night before. For courage, she'd explained seriously. The picture showed 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a bright sun. Veronica recognized herself in the middle. Ready? Warren asked, his voice steady. Veronica nodded, though her stomach was churning. Let's go. The courtroom was smaller than she'd expected, wood-paneled and austere, with rows of benches filled with reporters, investors, and curious onlookers. Damon sat at the defense table in an expensive suit, his posture rigid but composed. When Veronica entered, his eyes flicked toward her, cold and assessing. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Judge Corinne Wallace, called the hearing to order. The prosecutor, a sharp young attorney named Victor Reynolds, stood to present the charges. Your Honor, the government has substantial evidence showing that Mr. Prescott systematically embezzled over $42 million from Miles Global Innovations over a period of 3 years. When the CEO, Miss Veronica Miles, discovered irregularities in the company's accounts, Mr. Prescott attempted to frame her for his crimes using falsified documents and stolen digital credentials. Victor pulled up financial records on a screen visible to the entire courtroom. Timelines appeared, showing transactions processed during Veronica's documented absences. IP addresses traced back to Damon's office. Keystroke analysis confirmed someone other than Veronica had accessed her accounts. Furthermore, Victor continued, Mr. Prescott engaged in a campaign of personal and professional sabotage designed to destroy Miss Miles's reputation and credibility, making it easier to push her out of her own company. Damon's lead attorney, a silver-haired man named Silas Montgomery, rose smoothly. Your Honor, the prosecution's case relies heavily on circumstantial evidence and speculation. My client has served Miles Global with distinction for 5 years. Any financial irregularities can be explained through legitimate business decisions that Miss Miles herself approved. Then why did Mr. Prescott orchestrate Miss Miles's public humiliation at Lucille Blue? Victor shot back. Silas spread his hands. A personal disagreement between former romantic partners. Regrettable perhaps, but not criminal. Judge Wallace leaned forward. Mr. Reynolds, I assume you have witnesses to support these allegations? Yes, Your Honor. The prosecution calls Veronica Miles to the stand. Veronica's heart hammered as she walked to the witness box. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and sat down. From this angle, she could see everyone. Phoebe taking notes, Warren watching with steady confidence, Hadley clutching her drawing, and Damon staring at her with an expression that promised retaliation. Victor approached gently. Miss Miles, how long have you known the defendant? 7 years. We met at a tech conference. He joined my company 5 years ago as chief financial officer. And at some point, your relationship became romantic? Yes, we were engaged for 8 months. What ended the engagement? Veronica took a breath. I discovered financial irregularities in our accounts. When I confronted Damon, he told me I was mistaken, that I was stressed and seeing problems that didn't exist, but I kept digging. I found offshore accounts, shell companies, transfers I'd never authorized. When I told him I was going to the board, he said no one would believe me. Why wouldn't they believe you? Because he'd been preparing them not to. For months, he'd been planting seeds of doubt about my judgment, my emotional stability, my fitness to lead. Victor nodded. Tell the court what happened at Lucille Blue. Veronica recounted the entire evening, her voice steady despite the humiliation of reliving it. She described Gerard's discrimination, Damon's calculated appearance, his public dismissal of her concerns, and who intervened. Victor asked. Warren Ellison. He was working maintenance that night. He stood up for me when no one else would. Objection, Silas called. Relevance? Your Honor, this demonstrates Mr. Prescott's pattern of manipulation and abuse, Victor replied. I'll allow it. Continue. Victor played the audio recording Warren had captured that night. Damon's voice filled the courtroom, dripping with condescension. Several jurors shifted uncomfortably. One woman frowned deeply. When the recording ended, Victor turned back to Veronica. Miss Miles, in your professional opinion, did Mr. Prescott have the access, knowledge, and opportunity to embezzle these funds? Yes, he was CFO. He had authorization for most transactions. He knew my passwords because we'd shared them during our relationship. He knew my schedule, my routines, when I'd be unable to verify transfers in real time. Thank you, Miss Miles. Silas stood for cross-examination, his smile sharp. Miss Miles, isn't it true that you've been under significant stress for the past year? I've been under attack for the past year, Veronica corrected. You ended your engagement abruptly. You've made serious accusations against a respected colleague. Some might say your judgment has been impaired by emotion. Some might say that, Veronica replied evenly. But the financial records don't lie. The forensic audit confirms everything. I've claimed. Silas's smile tightened. You hired that auditor. He's hardly unbiased. The SEC conducted their own independent investigation, Veronica said. They reached the same conclusions. Silas switched tactics. Miss Miles, isn't it true you've had romantic involvement with Mr. Ellison, the janitor who conveniently recorded that evening at the restaurant? Warren stiffened in his seat. My personal relationships are irrelevant to this case, Veronica said firmly. Are they? Or have you orchestrated this entire scenario to take revenge on a man who ended your engagement? Damon didn't end our engagement, Veronica said, her voice rising slightly. I ended it when I discovered he was stealing from me and planning to destroy everything I'd built. Your Honor, Silas said smoothly. The witness is clearly emotional. The witness is clearly telling the truth, Judge Wallace replied dryly. Move on, counselor. Silas tried several more angles, but Veronica didn't waver. When she finally stepped down, Warren caught her eye and nodded once. Proud, steady, the prosecution called Gerard next. The maitre d' entered reluctantly, his confidence from that night completely gone. Under oath, he admitted Damon had called ahead, had specifically requested that Veronica be denied entry to the main dining room, had paid him $2,000 to ensure she was humiliated. Why did you agree? Victor asked. Gerard's voice was barely audible. Because Mr. Prescott said she'd been causing problems at his company. That she needed to be taught a lesson about respect. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Wallace gavelled for silence. By the time the hearing concluded, Damon's composure had cracked. His attorneys huddled around him, whispering urgently. The judge reviewed the evidence, then looked up. Based on the testimony and documentation presented today, I find sufficient cause to proceed to trial. Mr. Prescott, you will remain in custody pending arraignment. Bail is set at $5 million. Damon's face went white. Your Honor, I'm not a flight risk. You have significant financial resources and clear motivation to flee. Bail stands. As the marshals approached to take Damon into custody, he turned to Veronica one last time. You'll regret this, he said quietly. Everything you built, I helped create. Without me, you're nothing. Veronica met his gaze steadily. I was something long before you arrived. And I'll be something long after you're gone. The marshals led him away. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Veronica gave a brief statement, thanking the SEC and the U.S. Attorney's Office for their thorough investigation. She didn't mention Damon by name. She didn't need to. When the cameras finally turned away, Warren and Hadley were waiting by the bottom step. You were amazing, Warren said. Hadley held up her drawing. This is for you, for being brave. Veronica took the picture, her hands trembling slightly. Thank you, sweetheart. And as they walked away from the courthouse together, Veronica realized something profound. She'd been fighting for months to reclaim her company, her reputation, her dignity. But standing here with Warren and Hadley, she understood she'd won something far more valuable. She'd found people who saw her worth even when the world tried to convince her she had none. None. 6 months later, spring arrived in New York with an explosion of color that made the city feel reborn. Cherry blossoms lined the avenues, their petals drifting like pink snow. The air smelled fresh despite the traffic and the crowds, carrying the promise of new beginnings. Miles Global Innovations had weathered the storm. The trial had concluded 3 weeks ago with Damon receiving an 8-year federal prison sentence and being ordered to pay full restitution plus damages. The board had issued a formal apology to Veronica, and 3 members who'd supported Damon's narrative had quietly resigned. New investors had emerged, impressed not just by the company's technology, but by Veronica's resilience and integrity. But the real transformation wasn't in the boardroom. It was in Veronica herself. She stood in her office now, which she'd redecorated. Completely. Gone were the cold minimalist aesthetics and the massive desk that created distance between her and visitors. Instead, comfortable chairs circled a round table. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled not just with business texts but with novels, poetry collections, and books on philosophy. Photos had appeared too. Hadley's drawings, a picture of Warren laughing at something ridiculous, a snapshot of the 3 of them at the botanical gardens. Her assistant knocked softly. "Miss Miles? The reporter from Forbes is here for your interview." Veronica smoothed her jacket. This interview would be the first major piece since the trial concluded. Forbes wanted to feature her in their Resilience in Leadership series. She'd agreed on one condition: they had to tell the whole story, including the people who'd helped her survive it. The reporter, a thoughtful woman named Laurel Hastings, settled into one of the comfortable chairs. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with us. Your story has resonated with people across industries, especially women in leadership facing similar challenges. I'm glad if it helps anyone feel less alone," Veronica said. "Let's start at the beginning. When did you first realize something was wrong?" Veronica walked Laurel through the timeline, being careful to focus on the facts rather than the emotions. The discovery of the embezzlement, the gaslighting, the systematic attack on her reputation, the moment at Lucille Blue when she'd felt completely powerless. "And then a janitor stepped forward," Laurel said, leaning in. "Tell me about Warren Ellison." Veronica smiled, the first genuine smile of the interview. "Warren saw me at my absolute lowest point. He didn't see a CEO or a billionaire or someone worth networking with. He saw a person being treated unjustly, and he decided to do something about it. That must have been surprising." "It was transformative," Veronica corrected. "For months, I'd been surrounded by people with power and influence who chose to look away. Warren had everything to lose: his job, his ability to provide for his daughter, and he stood up anyway. That kind of courage is rare. You've since hired him, is that correct?" "Not exactly," Veronica said. "I created a position for him. Director of Facilities and Workplace Culture. Warren understands something most executives forget. The people doing the behind-the-scenes work are just as essential as anyone in the C-suite. He's helped me build a culture where everyone, regardless of their role, is treated with dignity." Laurel made notes. "There are rumors about your personal relationship with Mr. Ellison." Veronica's expression softened. "Warren and his daughter Hadley have become incredibly important to me. Beyond that, I'd prefer to keep my personal life private." "Fair enough. Let me ask you this. What would you say to other women facing similar situations?" Veronica considered carefully. "I'd say document everything. Trust your instincts. Don't let anyone convince you that your concerns are just emotions or stress. And find your people, the ones who'll stand beside you even when it's hard." "Your people," Laurel repeated. "Like Warren and Hadley." "Exactly." The interview continued for another hour, covering the trial, the company's recovery, and Veronica's plans for the future. When Laurel finally left, Veronica felt exhausted but satisfied. The story was out there now, the real story, not the version Damon had tried to write. Her phone buzzed. Warren's name appeared on the screen. Hadley wants to know if you're coming to dinner tonight. She's made her dessert and wants it to be a surprise, which means she's told me about it 5 times already. Veronica laughed. Tell her I wouldn't miss it. Good, because she's also been practicing a song on the piano. Fair warning, it's enthusiastic. I'm sure it's beautiful. You say that now, Warren teased. See you at 6? See you at 6. Veronica hung up and looked out the window at the city stretching before her. 6 months ago, she'd stood in a restaurant entryway, feeling like her life was ending. Now she understood it had only been transforming. She'd lost a fiancé who'd never truly loved her. But she'd gained a family that saw her clearly and chose her anyway. That evening, Veronica arrived at Warren's apartment building in Queens. It was modest, the kind of place that housed teachers and nurses and working families. She climbed 3 flights of stairs because the elevator was broken again, and knocked on the door marked 3F. Hadley answered, wearing an apron covered in flour. You're here, come in, come in. The apartment was small but warm, filled with Hadley's artwork and the smell of something delicious cooking. Warren emerged from the kitchen, also wearing an apron, looking relaxed in a way Veronica had never seen. At the corporate offices. Welcome to chaos, he said, grinning. They ate pasta with homemade sauce while Hadley chattered about her day at school. After dinner, Hadley performed her piano piece, which was indeed enthusiastic, if not exactly melodic. Veronica applauded genuinely, and Hadley beamed. When Hadley went to her room to get ready for bed, Warren and Veronica sat on the small balcony overlooking the street. The city lights twinkled below them, softer from this distance. Thank you, Veronica said quietly. For everything. Warren shook his head. You don't have to keep thanking me. Yes, I do. You gave me back something I thought I'd lost. What's that? The belief that good people exist, that courage matters, that I'm worth standing up for. Warren was quiet for a moment. Veronica, I didn't do anything special. I just did what felt right. That's exactly what made it special. He reached out and took her hand, his palm warm and calloused against hers. You've changed too, you know. 6 months ago, you wore your armor everywhere. Now you let people see you. That's terrifying, Veronica admitted. I know, but it's also beautiful. They sat in comfortable silence until Hadley called from inside. Daddy, I can't find my stuffed rabbit. Warren sighed good-naturedly. Crisis. Averted in 3, 2, 1, but as he stood, he paused. Veronica, there's something I've been wanting to ask you. Her heart skipped. Yes? Not yet, he said softly. Soon, but there's something I need to do first. And as he went inside to help Hadley, Veronica sat alone with the city stretched below her, wondering what came next. 8 months after the night that changed everything, Veronica received an unexpected phone call. The voice on the other end was hesitant, almost apologetic. Miss Miles? This is Gerard from Lucille Blue. I realize I'm likely the last person you want to hear from, but I wanted to inform you that the restaurant has undergone new management. We've implemented comprehensive policy changes and staff training on discrimination. The owner wanted to extend a personal invitation for you to dine with us, with our sincerest apologies for what occurred. Veronica's first instinct was to refuse. Why would she return to the place where she'd been humiliated? But then she remembered something Warren had said weeks ago. Sometimes healing means going back to the place that hurt you and proving it doesn't own you anymore. I'll come, Veronica said, but on one condition. I choose my guests. 3 days later, Veronica stood outside Lucille Blue wearing a crimson dress that made her feel powerful. Warren stood beside her in a tailored suit she'd insisted on buying. Him, though he'd protested extensively. Hadley wore a silver dress with sparkles, her hair pulled back in an elegant bun, that made her look impossibly grown-up for a 9-year-old. "Are you sure about this?" Warren asked quietly. Veronica looked at the entrance, at the place where she'd once felt so small. "I'm sure." The new manager, a kind-faced man named Jordan Fletcher, greeted them personally. "Miss Miles, it's an honor. Your table is ready." They were seated in the main dining room, the same space she'd been denied before. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead. White tablecloths gleamed. But this time, Veronica wasn't alone. This time, she had Warren on one side and Hadley on the other. "This place is fancy," Hadley whispered, eyes wide. "It's just a restaurant," Veronica whispered back. "The food might look prettier than at our diner, but it won't taste better than Joanne's pancakes," Hadley giggled. Dinner was exquisite. The chef had prepared a special menu, and Jordan personally ensured every detail was perfect. But Veronica barely tasted the food. She was too focused on the way Warren's eyes crinkled when he smiled, the way Hadley told elaborate stories about her art class, the way this place that had once symbolized her humiliation now felt like just another room. After dessert, Warren excused himself briefly. Hadley leaned over conspiratorially. "Daddy's nervous." "About what?" Veronica asked. "It's a secret," Hadley said, but her smile gave everything away. Warren returned moments later, but instead of sitting, he knelt beside Veronica's chair. The dining room grew quiet. People at nearby tables paused their conversations. "Veronica Miles," Warren began, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "8 months ago, I watched you stand in this restaurant and face something no one should have to face. You were alone, hurting, and the world had turned its back on you." Veronica's breath caught. "I couldn't walk away," Warren continued. "Not because I'm anyone special, but because I saw something in you that night. Strength, dignity, worth. Everything the people in this room had failed to recognize." Tears welled in Veronica's eyes. "Since then, you've changed my life and Hadley's life in ways I can't put into words. You've shown us what courage looks like, what resilience means, what it means to fight for what's right, even when the cost is high." Warren reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. The room collectively held its breath. "You came to this restaurant once as someone the world tried to diminish. I want you to leave tonight as someone who knows exactly how loved she is." He opened the box. Inside was a ring, simple and elegant, a platinum band with a single diamond that caught the light like a star. "Veronica, will you marry me?" The world seemed to stop. Veronica looked at Warren, at the man who had stood beside her when standing. Had cost him everything. She looked at Hadley, who was bouncing in her seat with barely contained excitement. She looked around the restaurant, at the place that had once represented her lowest moment, and she realized this was how healing happened. Not by avoiding the painful places, but by returning to them with people who loved you and creating new memories strong enough to replace the old ones. "Yes," Veronica whispered. "Yes, Warren. 1,000 times yes." The restaurant erupted in applause. Warren slid the ring onto her finger, his hands shaking slightly. Then Hadley launched herself at both of them, wrapping her arms around them in a fierce hug. "We're going to be a real family," Hadley exclaimed. Veronica laughed through tears. "We already were, sweetheart." Jordan approached with champagne and sparkling cider for Hadley, compliments of the house. "And on behalf of Lucille Blue, congratulations." As they toasted, Veronica caught sight of her reflection in the window. She saw a woman transformed, not because she'd won her battles or reclaimed her company, but because she'd learned something far more valuable. She'd learned that strength isn't measured by what you accomplish alone. It's measured by who stands beside you when accomplishing anything seems impossible. And for the first time in her life, Veronica understood what it meant to be truly wealthy. The garden ceremony took place on a perfect June morning in the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, where cherry blossoms had given way to summer roses. The venue was intimate, just 50 guests seated on white chairs beneath an arbor covered in climbing flowers. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, dappling everything in gold. Veronica had insisted on simplicity. No elaborate production, no society columns, no performance. Just the people who mattered most, celebrating something real. Phoebe served as maid of honor, standing beside Veronica in a lavender dress. Hadley was the flower girl, taking her role with utmost seriousness as she scattered rose petals down the aisle. The guests included Warren's former maintenance colleagues, several Miles Global employees, Keith the forensic accountant, even Joanne from the diner who'd become an unexpected friend. Warren stood at the altar in a charcoal gray suit, his hands clasped loosely, his expression a mix of joy and disbelief. Beside him was his best man, a longtime friend named Isaiah Monroe, who'd known Warren since his military days. When the music began, Veronica walked down the aisle alone. She'd considered asking her uncle to give her away, but decided against it. She wasn't being transferred from one person to another. She was choosing this freely and fully. Warren's eyes never left her as she approached. When she reached the altar, he whispered, "You're breathtaking." "So are you," she whispered back. The officiant, a warm-voiced woman named Tegan Lawson, smiled at the assembled guests. "We gather today to witness the union of two people who found each other in the most unexpected way. Their story reminds us that love often arrives when we're not looking for it, in the form of someone who sees us clearly and chooses us anyway." Tegan turned to Warren. "Please share your vows." Warren took Veronica's hands, his grip steady. "Veronica, the first time I saw you, you were sitting alone in a place meant for celebration, and the world had just told you that you weren't enough. But I saw something different. I saw a woman who'd built an empire, who'd fought battles most people can't imagine, who carried herself with grace, even when grace was the hardest thing to find." His voice grew thick with emotion. "You taught me that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and showing up anyway. You taught Hadley that strength comes in many forms, that setbacks don't define us, that believing in yourself matters more than what anyone else thinks." He paused, collecting himself. "I promise to stand beside you in every boardroom and every difficult moment. I promise to see you, really see you, even when you're too tired to see yourself. I promise to build a life with you that's based on truth, respect, and the kind of love that makes us both better." Veronica's eyes shimmered with tears. Tegan nodded gently. "Veronica, your vows." Veronica took a breath. "Warren, 8 months ago, I thought I knew what strength looked like. I thought it meant standing alone, proving I didn't need anyone, building walls so high that nothing could hurt me. And then you walked into my life wearing coveralls and carrying a mop, and you showed me I'd been wrong about everything." A soft laugh rippled through the guests. "You taught me that strength is knowing when to ask for help. That dignity isn't something others can take from you. That the most valuable things in life aren't the ones you accomplish, they're the connections you build with people who matter." She squeezed his hands. "You gave me back something I thought I'd lost, the ability to trust, to hope, to believe that good people exist, and that I deserve to be loved by one of them. I promise to honor that gift every day. I promise to be there for you and Hadley the way you've been there for me. I promise to build a life with you that's filled with laughter, honesty, and the kind of partnership where we lift each other up." Tegan smiled. "The rings, please." Hadley stepped forward importantly, carrying a small pillow with 2 platinum bands. Warren and Veronica exchanged rings, their fingers intertwining naturally. "By the power vested in me," Tegan said warmly, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Warren, you may kiss your bride." Warren cupped Veronica's face gently, and their kiss was soft and full of promise. The guests erupted in applause and cheers. Hadley jumped up and down, clapping so enthusiastically her flower crown slipped sideways. As they walked back down the aisle together, Veronica felt something profound settle in her chest. Not relief, not vindication, not even happiness though. She felt that too. What she felt was wholeness. For the first time in her life, she wasn't performing or proving or protecting. She was just being loved and loving in return. The reception was held in a nearby pavilion strung with lights. There was dancing and laughter and toasts that made everyone cry and laugh in equal measure. Phoebe told stories about Veronica's determination. During the trial, Isaiah shared tales of Warren's loyalty and steadfastness. Hadley gave a speech that consisted mostly of "I love my new mom," repeated in various ways, which earned her a standing ovation. As evening fell and the lights twinkled overhead, Warren pulled Veronica onto the dance floor. They swayed together, not quite following the music, just holding each other close. "No regrets?" Warren murmured. "Not a single one," Veronica replied. Hadley wedged herself between them, refusing to be left out. They danced as a family, the three of them together, while the people who'd helped them through the darkness looked on with genuine joy. Later, when most guests had departed and the night grew quiet, Veronica stood at the edge of the garden looking up at the stars. Warren joined her, slipping an arm around her waist. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That a year ago, I thought my life was ending. I'd lost everything that mattered. My company stability, my relationship, my faith in people. I felt broken beyond repair. And now?" Veronica leaned into him. "Now I understand that I wasn't broken. I was just becoming something different. Something better." Warren kissed her temple. "Something extraordinary." Hadley appeared beside them, yawning. "Can we go home now?" "Yes, sweetheart," Veronica said, taking her hand. "Let's go home." And as they walked together through the garden, toward their future, Veronica realized that home wasn't a place. It wasn't a building or a city or even a country. Home was the people who saw you at your worst and loved you anyway. Home was the ones who stood beside you when standing was the hardest thing in the world. Home was Warren and Hadley, and the life they would build together. A life based not on what she'd accomplished or acquired, but on what she'd learned to give and receive. Unconditional love, unwavering support, and the courage to be vulnerable. As they reached the garden gate, Veronica looked back one last time at the pavilion glowing with lights. Then she turned forward toward Warren and Hadley and everything that came next. She didn't know what challenges they would face. She didn't know what victories or struggles lay ahead. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever came, they would face it together. And that made all the difference. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from US.